Have you ever been in a situation where you were talking with somebody and you took something that they said the wrong way? In other words, you misinterpreted the meaning that they were going for and you got all upset only to find out later that it was completely in your head. So to give you an example, let's say you have two colleagues talking and one of them is taller than the other guy. One is a short guy, one's a tall guy. And short guy is relating some situation maybe at work where he got screwed over and he's like, oh man, I can't believe they did this. And the tall guy replies, wow, you really got the short end of the stick on that one. And short guy interprets this as him dissing his height. And so he's like, what do you mean the short end of the stick? Why would you say this? Oh, because I'm short, is that it? And the other guy's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not what I meant at all, bro. And it turns out it was just completely in the guy's head. And now he looks kind of insecure, quite frankly. So I think that everybody's had one of these experiences at one time or another. I know that I certainly have. And looking back, they do comprise some of the most cringe memories that in my life. You know, I kind of look back at them like, oh, yeesh, that was not the best. So why are these moments so embarrassing? Well, when you misunderstand what somebody says as a personal attack, basically it just serves to highlight, boldface, and underline for everybody around all of your insecurities. In other words, if you didn't say anything, nobody would have thought twice. So when something like this happens, it's very often the result of something that we call filters of insecurity. And everybody has these to one degree or another. And they're kind of like these tinted glasses inside of our heads that color everything that we perceive. And I'll give you another example here. Let's say that you have a person of high self-esteem and you have a person of low self-esteem and they are given the same compliment, right? The person says, hey, I like your jacket. Nice jacket. Now, the person that has high self-esteem is likely to just graciously accept the compliment and move on. Oh, cool, thanks, man. Right? That's it. Not a big deal. On the other hand, the person with low self-esteem might interpret the remark as being sarcastic or possibly condescending due to his internal filters of insecurity about his appearance. And these filters actually change the way that he hears things, and they transform this innocent compliment into this snide dig about his lame-ass jacket. You see the difference here? So now let's imagine the same two people, and they're on the receiving end of a bona fide insult, an actual insult. So the example would be, I wear this red leather jacket sometimes. You may have seen it in other videos of mine if you watch my channel. And it's a pretty cool jacket, but it's quite flashy. And when I wear that out, people will make remarks about it. Some people think it's cool. Some people try to tool me on it. And very often when people are trying to make fun of it, they'll be like, oh, I like your jacket. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson. Like from Thriller, right? And the low self-esteem person, if he were to hear that, he would be crushed. Like if I had low self-esteem and someone's like, Michael Jackson, you're wearing the same jacket as the infamous, notorious, alleged pedo. Like what? And I'd be like, oh, Michael Jackson, hang it up in the closet, never to be seen again. However, when I hear that, I'll be like, yeah, hee, shamon. Like I'll play along with it as though it's a joke. So you see, not only in that instance am I free of filters of insecurity, I actually have filters of confidence, right? The high self-esteem people have filters of confidence, and that protects them and proactively defends you against attacks like that. And the point is this, if you're high self-esteem and you interpret things as a joke, it becomes a joke. Even if it's a bona fide insult, you interpret it as a joke, it becomes a joke not only to you, but to everyone else around who bore witness to it. And it's the same with the low self-esteem guy's reaction to the compliment. That interpretation becomes the meaning for all intents and purposes. Perception is reality. In fact, it was interesting. This actually happened a couple weeks ago. I had one of my assistants, he invited a friend of his to come onto the program. And I'd never met this guy before, but he had on this really cool, what I perceived to be a really cool corduroy brown jacket. I was like, oh, I like this corduroy, man. It's like the 70s. It's pretty pimping, man. I like what I see here. Dope. And I just moved along, and later my friend told me that the friend was kind of insulted by my comment. He thought I was being sarcastic and mocking the jacket, when in fact I did actually think it was quite cool. So this is related to a concept that I've talked about a lot before, and of course that concept is frame control. And your frame, well, that's the way that you perceive things to be in any given situation and in any social interaction. of course, the strongest frame wins. And other people are going to get sucked into that, right? It kind of becomes the consensus reality. So think about how you would behave. You're walking down the street and a police officer comes up to you and he starts asking you a bunch of questions. Maybe his hand is kind of hovering near his firearm. And, you know, if he's asking you these questions, you're probably going to choose your words pretty carefully. You might adjust your posture to be non-threatening. You might refer to him as sir. Your body language is going to become kind of deferent and, you know, right, yes, sir, officer. You might not be able to hold eye contact as long as you would with some random chode if they were asking you these questions. Now, conversely, imagine if some 10-year-old came up to you and started asking you the same questions. Can I see some ID? Where do you live? What are you doing here? If they ask you the same questions, it's unlikely that you would even give much thought to how you responded at all. And it's even less likely that you'd have difficulty keeping eye contact and be deferential to them. All right, so for a person of high status, and this is obviously a bit of hyperbole, but they kind of view the entire world the same way that you would the 10-year-old. So you see, tolerance to social pressure is a conveyor of status. Demonstrating status, demonstrating value is one of the most crucial aspects of charisma. So your inner game, so to speak, as Timothy Galway would call it, sort of affects your ability to withstand social pressure. And like it or not, that is going to manifest itself through your body language, your voice, your eye contact, and countless other social cues. And this is why it's very important to pinpoint your so-called filters of insecurity and do whatever is necessary to start to eradicate them, or at least begin to release them and let them go. Become aware, again, with all of this stuff that we talk about, awareness is the first step. And then you can start without shame, without guilt. Oh, I'm so terrible because I have these inhibitions or these, you know, psychological counter conditionings that are preventing me from being the most charismatic I can be, and it's some unique failing of me as an individual. It's like, no, look, this is the human condition to an extent. You develop that awareness, and then you can start the process of release and replacing their manifestations in your life. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and list some of the most common filters of insecurity for you here. Number one is going to be being stuck in your head. And I see this one quite a lot. Have you ever been talking to somebody and it seems like they're not really listening to you, right? They're actually somewhere else. In fact, imagine this. Imagine you're talking to somebody and you're trying to tell them a story that's pretty important to you, and this is, say, a close friend of yours, and they're kind of on their phone. And you see that they're looking at their phone, and they're just sort of responding with like one-word, non-committal, monosyllabic answers, like, yeah, that's crazy. Oh, uh-huh, yeah. It starts to become annoying pretty quickly, right? Because you feel as though in fact, when I'm in that situation, I'm like, just look on your phone. Just don't even pretend. Don't even pretend that you're talking to me. That would be less insulting to me. So if you don't have that presence when that engagement with somebody when you're speaking to them, you can't convey charisma. When you're not present, you're not paying attention to other people, what does this result from? Well, likely it's because your state is internal. You're attempting to micromanage other people's perception of you. You're like, do I look cool here? Am I coming off okay? What's the next move? What's the next thing? Let me judge the next thing I say very carefully before I say it, so I can kind of walk the tightrope of pleasing the other person, or, you know, sort of pandering to what I think that they might like. So in other words, you're judging yourself in process. And quite honestly, this takes up a lot of bandwidth that prevents you from having that presence that is so essential to charisma. When you are judging yourself in process, you're not present, you're not living in the moment, and it can actually end up hurting you. Number two is nervousness. Now, with this one, the fear of failure colors everything around you. So take a minute and think about how this could actually sabotage your charisma. A person of true high status wouldn't view social interaction as something having potentially negative consequences. So if you're portraying yourself as somebody of high status, but underneath you're nervous, it's going to show. So you've got to shake that nervousness off. Now, a lot of the time, I think that this comes from speculation. And one thing that I'm always saying is speculation is inadmissible in this game, right? In this court, so to speak. Objection, relevance, it's simply not relevant. And I think a lot of times we sort of play these negative mental movies of how badly things could play out in our head. Like if I go up, these people, they look like they have a sort of a mean face. They have like the classic resting bitch face. They're going to be mean if I go up. I don't know if I should do that. Or, you know, if I go up, these people around are going to mock me or ridicule me. Or if I go up, it's not going to go well. And look, you got to understand, acknowledge the fact you are not clairvoyant, you are speculating. So if you're going to speculate, you might as well tell a better story. That's equally valid. It's equally valid to the negative story because you simply don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of uncertainty surrounding what's going to happen when you meet new people. You simply don't know how they're going to react. And many people, especially when they first get into this, are highly, highly uncomfortable with that uncertainty. And they default to these negative mental movies. So, you know, again, tell yourself a better story and shake off that nervousness. Number 3 is paranoia. Now, this is a big one. This kind of related in many ways to the previous one, but it's distinctly different. And this one's particularly insidious. You know, let's say that you're out and you're meeting people at a party and you hear a group of people start laughing behind you. And you instantly assume that they're laughing at you. You're like, oh, they saw me go up and they're laughing at me. So your state kind of breaks and your emotional state drops a little bit. Turns out they were just laughing at some joke that their friend told, and that was it. It was that innocent. But that's irrelevant. The damage is done, and so are you. Right? A lot of people, they'll walk down the street. I ask this question to clients sometimes, and it's quite revealing. I'm like, what do you think if you're walking down the street and you see some people across the street kind of gesturing towards you and like smiling and talking to each other and kind of pointing at you? What would you think? And many people, they're like, oh, I think that they're talking about me. Maybe they're kind of making fun of how I look. Personally, what I would think if I see that, I'm like, oh, they know who I am from YouTube. And they're like, look, it's that awesome dude. Now, is that true? I don't know. In fact, this happened to me the other night. Some guy came up to me, he's like, hey, man, you're cool, or something like that. Oh, thanks, man. So how long you watch my stuff? He's like, what are you talking about? The guy just thought I was like cool because I was doing some weird thing in the bar or something. But I just assumed, it's like, well, clearly he knows who I am and he thinks I'm awesome. So it's sort of like an anti-paranoia. Of course, as you know, the saying goes, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, but it doesn't serve you in this case. You should behave as though it does mean they're not out to get you. So that's number 3. Number 4 is self-monitoring. If you're constantly analyzing that reaction that people have to everything that you say to make sure that it's well received, you're walking on eggshells, right? You're going to be very, very carefully selecting the words that are coming out of your mouth. And basically, this results in what we call outcome dependence, which reeks of neediness. So the problem with self-monitoring is, look, analysis is great. Your intellect, your mind, it's absolutely essential for you to navigate the world successfully, right? The mind, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. You know, the mind's not some villain. It certainly has villainous characteristics at times, but it does a lot of good things, right? It analyzes, it can make creative decisions in the moment of what to say and do in a certain situation. It can remember the past and learn from it. It can imagine the future, hopefully, and plan for the future. But the problem is it can also judge. And the mind, you know, in many people, their intellect has elevated itself to this position of authority over the entire system. It thinks it's everything. You know, it might grudgingly acknowledge other energies like intuition, dreams and stuff like that. But basically it's like the mind, logical thought is me. That is me, right? All of these other modalities of communication that sort of combine to form the gestalt of my communication, my facial expressions, my vocal tonality, my gesture, body language, movement through space, my emotional process, my intuition, my higher observer, all tapping into universal energy, all that stuff, it's all just the mind. But unfortunately, the mind in many cases is not equipped to handle these very energies that it's put itself in charge of. And so again, you get a lot of these same problems I was talking about a moment ago. Judging in process simply causes you to, number one, not be present. It causes you to second guess yourself, and it ends up acting as a barrier between inner energies and outer expression. You want the mind to kind of be observing, guiding, but it's like a coach. It doesn't need to be the player, right? The coach doesn't play on the basketball court, right? The coach calls the plays from the sideline and lets the players do their thing. So you want your mind to be a bridge, not a barrier between inner and outer. Of course, a bridge does have guardrails, and that's kind of what the mind's there for, to kind of guide, kind of make choices in the moment, but it shouldn't be over asserting itself. So through introspection, you can start to see how, and meditation is very helpful with this, you can start to see how the mind functions and these tendencies that it has to want to assert itself in the moment. And you can realize, hey, you can just let go. You can let the synergistic wisdom of the whole take over. You can allow familiarity with technique to sort of assert itself in that flow state. And the mind will become increasingly a useful resource for you in your interactions, as opposed to being this judgmental fucking hindrance. So again, drop the self-monitoring. You've got to give up predictive control to gain in-process control. And for a lot of people, especially people who are very logical, this seems like a pretty radical concept, but particularly in socializing, it's absolutely essential. And once you start to kind of nudge the intellect to sort of relinquish that obsessive need to control every single element of your communication and kind of take a backseat on the sidelines and just start guiding and directing, again, it'll become an increasingly useful resource for you. It becomes a bridge, not a barrier. Okay, number 5 is undeservedness. And this one is quite insidious. And personally, I used to be massively guilty of this one. I felt that I was not deserving of the results that I ostensibly wanted, right? It's also, you might have heard this called a lack of entitlement. I would approach people that I wanted to meet, that I felt were of very high status, and that were people who were in high demand by others as well. Other people wanted their time, wanted their attention. Either they were highly attractive or they were somebody that I admired a great deal. And inexplicably, I would screw it up. And this is after I had had a lot of experience too. And I just couldn't understand why. Because, when I would go up to somebody who you might consider just a normal person, or somebody I felt like of average attractiveness or whatever, I'd have no problem whatsoever executing like picture perfect technique and just being super charming and super free flowing. I knew exactly what to do and I would execute it. But for some reason, when I hit up those so-called high caliber people, it was like I just forgot all those lessons and they just went out the window. And for the longest time, I just couldn't understand it. I just forgot all the lessons and I started just acting like an idiot, essentially. And I realized that this is related to filters of insecurity. I felt that I didn't deserve to be with those people. And why was that? Because I felt that I wasn't worthwhile enough myself. And it wasn't until I understood that idea and rejected it and began to say, look, number one, I have intrinsic value. I am enough. I am good enough as I am. Of course, some people are going to like that. Some people aren't going to see that value. And yes, it is incumbent upon me to display that. But at the end of the day, that's totally fine. I don't like everybody. Why should I expect everybody to like me? I just need to go up, do what I'm supposed to do, let the chips fall where they may, and not be so worried about it, right? And that's when I started having more success in those situations and winning. So again, understand you are enough. You're for some, not for others. Go up, put your personality on the table in that middle space, invite them to meet you in the middle, and you'll start actually winning in those situations as well. Okay, number 6 is fear of expression. So if you've heard of stage fright, that's kind of what this is. Now, make no mistake, when you are meeting a new person, it's no different than getting up on a stage and, say, delivering a monologue or singing a song in front of a crowd, right? It's all about expression. And when you go up to somebody, when you meet somebody for the first time, whether you're initiating that interaction or not, there's definitely a sense of performance, right? Because you're very, very aware of being observed, and that other person's sort of judging to an extent. Like, okay, what's this person all about, right? That first impression, there's definitely a sense of performance to that interaction. So one thing that we always said is that charisma is essentially an expression of an internal state conveyed by the rhythms that you use to direct the energy of the interaction. So if you want to have social success, you've got to be unafraid to get out there and just shine, right? To get out there, not be too concerned about, I guess put it a different way. Get up there, you got to change your relationship with the uncertainty, right? Some people are going to like it, some people are not. The fear is always going to be there. So once you realize that you are the one responsible for creating that unpleasant internal exercise space, so to speak, you're the one responsible for your addiction to that judgment, right? Being told, are you good enough? Being told what to do. Once you realize you're the one responsible, you can drop that and you can start to view it as play, not this work, not this balls-racking referendum on your value as a human being. Again, you got to be unafraid to get out there and just shine and let the chips fall where they may. And that's what charisma is all about. And when you have that, people are drawn to it like a magnet. Okay? Number 7 is arrogant beliefs. Now, someone with arrogant beliefs, basically this person, they refuse to acknowledge that they could learn anything from someone else. And this can end up hindering your development socially if you're trying to be a more charismatic communicator, because oftentimes the biggest revelations can come from unlikely sources. For example, believe it or not, every single program that I do, I learn something from the clients. You know, it goes both ways, and that's one of the main reasons that I continue to do this job 2 decades in, despite all the ups and downs and all the trials and tribulations, is because I view this as a way for me to fulfill my purpose of understanding the human energy system as in life and communication as deeply as I can, and thereby come to a better understanding of myself, and then be able to impart that to more people as I go about my career. So oftentimes, though, the thing that I learned from the students is what not to do, a new thing, what not to do, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, always keep the student framed. Your time is valuable. You can't know everything. And, you know, sometimes you just got to go to somebody who's dedicated their life to actually learning this stuff, whatever that is, whether it's singing, whether it's dancing, whether it's race car driving, whether it's investing, or whether it's this, whether it's social skills and charisma. And open your mind. You know, drop all pre-existing beliefs and just say, you know what, I'm just going to try out what they've got to say. I'm not going to defend what I'm currently doing as some choice. I'm just going to, again, be open-minded, try on these new shoes. Might be a little painful to wear in at first, but again, my time is valuable, so I'm not going to be arrogant about that. Number 8 is hinging self-esteem on what other people think. Now, if you've got this particular filter in your head, your state is very, very easily broken as soon as somebody launches an attack on it. So, unfortunately, when you do this, this betrays you as somebody with a weak frame who is not of high status and actually sinks your charisma. So, always bear in mind that a random person's opinion of you has nothing to do with your value as a human being any more than your ability to shoot a basketball does. As I said earlier, we're all subject to negative social counter conditioning to one degree or another, right? Things like self-deceit, abdication of responsibility and blame, judgment, confusion, perfectionism, negativism, you know, and many, many more. And these are things that were instilled upon us by the educational system, our peer group, the larger culture, the media, your parents, possible religious upbringing, corporate culture. And over time, basically the message is this: emotions must be carefully hidden and controlled. Generally, you need to be very careful about your usage of energy. You need to keep your head down. The tall poppy gets cut. And as such, this develops into kind of the granddaddy of all tension entanglements, which is judgment, right? Anticipation of judgment leads directly to the anticipatory entanglement, which is where, you know, before you even go up, you anticipate potential failure, you anticipate potential ridicule, and boom, you freeze up, your body calls tension into play, and you have an inability to express yourself. So again, you've got to get to a point where, like I said, you value your own opinion of yourself more highly than the opinion of some random person that, number one, you didn't even know existed 2 minutes ago. you probably won't even remember exists 2 minutes from now if it doesn't work out. And same goes for them. They're not going to remember. They're going to be talking about this 2 weeks from now. Remember that guy that came up and spoke to us at the party? Oh, what a loser. He was like, it becomes this ongoing story they tell their grandchildren 50 years from now. It's like, no, they're not even going to remember it. But furthermore, and this is the important point here, any sort of failings that you have currently or inhibitions you have around expressing yourself currently, they do not represent some inherent failing of you as an individual. Again, it's the human condition. Everyone has these to one degree or another. And I think the best refutation to that idea is given by the evidence of those who have gone before. You know, if you saw myself or Julian or Owen or anyone else you think of as being competent at this stuff, if you saw us when we first started, you would have no doubts whatsoever about your ability to replicate anything that you see us do socially, right? Because we were just in the same spot as everyone else. The difference is we were able to learn the nature of the inhibitions, pinpoint them, diagnose them, start the process of release, expand our palette so we could do whatever we wanted socially and apply that thoughtfully, learn certain techniques, and move forward. And you can do the same. Again, it's just a skill. Number 9 is fear to break rapport. This is the 9th filter of insecurity. Now, many clients that I work with are plagued by this because, quite frankly, they're afraid to be perceived as rude, right? I don't want to be rude. And this literally happened this past weekend. I had a client and she was speaking to somebody and somebody attempted to interrupt her. And this person was like, are you French? Are you French? And she's like, no. And she said for her to even do that, to say no and just kind of ignore the person, she felt a severe inhibition against doing that. And I was like, well, first off, this person's interrupting your interaction that you're trying to have. You're trying to build a connection with this person here. This person's interrupting because they have their own agenda. And I get it. We are conditioned from a very, very young age to be like, it's just polite. When somebody addresses you, you respond in kind. You reply. That's called being polite. So particularly in social situations like that, you might have an extreme inhibition against just kind of dismissing someone like that. But in that case, again, this person is not your friend. Like I said, they've got their own agenda. They're trying to interfere or intervene and interrupt, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. But people, again, they're like, I wasn't raised that way. I don't want to seem rude. But what you don't realize is that in many situations, actually breaking rapport is the correct course of action. For example, again, when somebody tries to tool you, or possibly in the initial stages of an interaction in order to generate interest, or to, if they're trying to run a power frame on you, to kind of break the power frame and make them go, okay, game recognized game, okay, this person's a real one, let's go, man, as opposed to just dismissal. So, but a lot of students are just so paralyzed by the very idea that they might be thought of as rude that either A, they fail to act, or they just can't do it, and they kind of watch the whole house of cards come tumbling down. So don't be a doormat, okay? Stand up and be counted, break rapport when necessary, all right? Filter of insecurity number 10 is a need to entertain. Feeling a need to be this, hey, entertainer, aka the curse of the dancing monkey. So basically, this is kind of like, it's feeling that you have this constant need to impress others so they don't grow bored and run away from you, right? If I'm not entertaining, they'll lose interest and they'll go away. Now, to be fair, you do have to bring something different to the table, right? But it doesn't need to be this vaudeville show. So this is indicative of a lack of confidence. You don't feel intrinsically valuable, so you bust out all these old jokes and these old gimmicks in an attempt to hold the attention of the group. And yeah, sure, you might hold their attention, but all you're really doing in this case is providing them with their entertainment for the evening. And when closing time comes around, it's going to be, oh, well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet you, and you're likely going to be going home disappointed. So lose this desire to entertain. You want to entertain yourself, not other people. So lose this need to entertain others. Drop it like a hot rock. So these filters of insecurity here that I've listed, they're just a sample of the more common ones that we see. And this is by no means intended to be some kind of comprehensive catalog. So simply ask yourself which of these could potentially apply to me, and then do your best to eliminate them from your life. On my live programs, I apply a critical eye to giving you very, very descriptive and actionable feedback, whether it's on my 8-week mentoring program or in the live trainings. Again, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I try to frame these criticisms in a way that I said is very descriptive. So I don't want to trigger more defensiveness. I simply want to describe what I see and say, I see you're making a choice to do X, Y, Z. Perhaps you'd like to do this. And sometimes that outside observer, that outside observation is enough to get you started down the path, because we have a lot of blind spots. You know, you are your own instrument, and as such, it can be very, very difficult to tell what you're doing a lot of the time. So a lot of the trainings that we do are designed to make you experientially aware of that gap between what you think you're projecting and what's being perceived by other people. And like I said, awareness is the first step, right? That is an overarching theme of all charisma training, of all social skills training, is becoming aware of where you have inhibitions around expression, of the inhibitions that are preventing you from taking the actions and exhibiting the behaviors that you have to do to get the results you want, and then starting, as I said, without guilt, without shame, because that's what caused these problems in the first place, to start that process of release so you can start making decisions and choices of your own with power and clarity. This has been Jeffy, and I'll see you next time. Jeffy.